Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says, does data protection bill have safeguards on privacy? The article here is speaking about data protection bill. Back in the year 2017, we have the Supreme Court of India which delivered a landmark judgment in Puttaswamy versus the Union of India. What did the Supreme Court say? The Supreme Court said that explicitly we do not have the mention of privacy in the Constitution of India. However, privacy is an ingredient aspect of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So, what was not mentioned in the Constitution, the Supreme Court guaranteed privacy as one of the fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. This is one part of the story. There is another part of the story as well. What is it? India has large number of internet users. As many as 800 million internet users are present in India, and India has many international companies as well. Let's say for example we have Google, we also have Facebook as well, we also have Twitter. All these companies are making use of the data of the Indian citizens. So what should happen? They may sell this data, and we also know for the fact that data is the new fuel when it comes to the modern economics as well. So this required control of personal data. On one side, Supreme Court had said that privacy is an ingredient aspect of Article 21, which is a fundamental right which should not be violated. On the other side, you also have largest number of users from India and their data had to be protected. We also had lacunae in the existing laws as well. We also had Information Technology Act of 2000. This did not speak about the smartphones. This did not speak much about the internet penetration and the responsibility of the social media. In order to address all these issues and concerns that which was existing in India, since we do not have a law to protect the data protection, what we required was one law, which is why the government comes up with Personal Data Protection Bill of 2019. So in this Personal Data Protection Bill, the government says that there are users, that is the citizens. Their data can be taken by the government, their data can be taken by private officers, which means to say the corporate body units, and they can also be collected by other entities as well. So regulating this particular process, who is responsible for it, what is the fiduciary relationship between the intermediary, the data provider, the data protector and the company, was established as part of the Personal Data Protection Bill. So this data protection bill basically means that there are some personal data. This personal data given by the citizens, given by the users, will have to be safeguarded by the government, by the private entities as well as organizations who are collecting the data. Let's say for example, the personal information can be sensitive data as well. What is this sensitive data? Let's say we are having financial data, biometric data, caste, religion, political viewpoints, and any other specific data which the government calls as sensitive data. If it is given by the user to the company or to the government, how will it be regulated? Is what is this Personal Data Protection Bill? So the government introduces this Personal Data Protection Bill. However, whenever there is a complex bill that is to be proposed, whenever it will have a larger implications on the citizens, this also requires a thorough scrutiny. So what should happen? This should be referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, which is why this particular Personal Data Protection Bill, to get further scrutinized, to look into every section possible, it was referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. So when it comes to committees, we have what is called as the Standing Committee. We also have the Ad Hoc Committees. The Joint Parliamentary Committee happens to be an ad hoc committee. Why is it called as Joint Parliamentary Committee? That is because it has people, it has the member of the parliament both from the Lok Sabha as well as from the Rajya Sabha, which is why it is called as Joint Parliamentary Committee. So remember, a Joint Parliamentary Committee will have people from Lok Sabha, will have people from Rajya Sabha, and the number of people from Lok Sabha will be double than that of the Rajya Sabha. What will this particular committee do? This particular committee will collect the evidence. It will ask people their idea, their input about this particular bill. It will also speak to multiple stakeholders as well. It will also seek expertise from these people who might be influenced by this particular legislation, and at the same time it may also give recommendations to the parliament as well. So the committee, after looking into all these ideas and proposals, will get disbanded once it submits its report to the parliament. So in the present situation, what we have is the Personal Data Protection Bill, which was given to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. The Joint Parliamentary Committee scrutinizes this particular bill and ultimately gives its recommendation to the parliament. So this article here is speaking about some of the recommendations given by the Joint Parliamentary Committee to the parliament. So what happens? We have the Joint Parliamentary Committee. It looks into this entire legislation and it focuses on two important sections. One happens to be section 35 of the bill. The other happens to be about section 12 of the bill. This section primarily focuses on the government. What is it about the government? As we discussed, we have the user. The user would give this particular information to the government. But can the government give this information to its agencies? That is the question. So the government, if it is a threat through the security of the country or it is violating the public order, it can be a problem on the sovereignty of the country, and if it is going to disturb friendly relationship with foreign countries or for the security of the country, in such a case the so-called personal data which we, the users, the citizens, have given to the government can be given to its agencies. So the government will lay a regulatory mechanism how this data will be given, what type of data will be given, what data can be used by its agencies. That is what is captured under section 35 of the bill. When this was referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, everyone expected that the Joint Parliamentary Committee would bring changes in section 35 of the bill. But they have retained this particular section. They say that yes, the government will have to be given such power where if required, the government can give this data of the user, of the citizen, to the agencies to prevent ill effects on the state. You also have some of the detractors, you also have some of the critics of this provision who say that this should have been given or should have come under judicial scrutiny or care, but since it is not taken into picture, the present situation is that the Joint Parliamentary Committee has suggested to the parliament that you can go ahead and retain this particular section. So the final report does not favor any change in the provision and ultimately says that status quo or the provision can remain on the legislation. That is one of the important provisions of this legislation. Then we also have section 12 as well. What is it about section 12? This speaks about data localization. What is it about data localization? Let's say, for example, we have one of the companies. This particular company, which is a foreign based company, it can be Facebook, it can be Google, or it can be Twitter. When they are taking our data, the user data, who are citizens of India, such data should be collected on the servers which are hosted in India. When you had the earlier scenarios, what used to happen? The data that was collected was sent to servers which are hosted in some other country. It can be United States of America, it can be United Kingdom as well. But this particular legislation clearly points out that the data of the citizens of the country, when it is collected, it has to be hosted in the home country. So what is it asking for? It is asking for that these servers should be present in India. The data of its citizens should be collected and be present in India. So data localization has to be present, says this legislation. So the Joint Parliamentary Committee has also given consent to section 12 of this particular proposed bill as well. What does it speak about the social media? When we speak about social media, what we have to understand is it is acting as an intermediary. What is an intermediary? Let's say you are the customer or the user of the social media. Then you have the intermediary, which is nothing but, let's say, Facebook. or let's consider it to be Twitter, and there is an other person who is also viewing it. It can be any other person. So what do? Let's say you write a content on the intermediary. Let's say you criticize the government. Let's say you are very critically evaluating one of the schemes of the government. So if it goes against the public order, who will take the blame of it? It is this person who's posted something on Facebook will be ultimately blamed. That is where the social media regulations of this particular legislation comes into picture, which is called as safe harbor protection. So what is safe harbor protection? If there is one of the users of this social media platform, if he's written something which may violate the peace in the society, then this particular intermediary like the Facebook or Twitter will not be blamed by it, but instead all the cases will be put up on this particular user. But if this intermediary itself is publishing something, it can act as a publisher. So the law, if it is being violated, then such a social media intermediary can be treated as a publisher and he would be prosecuted, penalized for the action. So this article currently goes on to say that as per the Joint Parliamentary Committee, it says that safe harbor protection can only be provided if it is acting as an intermediary and not as a publisher. Apart from this, there have been other developments when it comes to Joint Parliamentary Committee. It has said the bill should cover both personal and non-personal data, where non-personal data would also include traffic information which Google Maps provides to all of us. So such data's information will also have to be introduced as part of the legislation, is one of the recommendations made by the Joint Parliamentary Committee. We will take this up more in detail once the government decides to introduce this in the parliament. Now let's look into the next article. This article says lawmakers do not assess impact of laws. The article here is speaking about pendency of cases in the Indian judicial system and also suggests some of the recommendations to reform the Indian judicial system. When we look into number of cases that are lying idle in Indian judicial system, we have as many as 4.5 crore cases. What does this mean? It can be segmented, that is as much as 3.9 crore case are present in the district and the subordinate courts, as much as 58.5 lakh cases are present in various high courts, and we have as much as 69,000 cases in the Supreme Court of India. What are the reasons why pendency of cases are increasing in the Indian judicial system? The primary reason being the vacancy. What happens? There are vacancies in the Indian judicial system. Judges should be appointed, judicial officers should be appointed, and this should happen on a periodic basis. Even if the judiciary is making recommendations on a timely basis, there is friction, and because of the undue delay in the appointment process, which is why the pendency of the cases have been increasing. Added to this, what we require is the infrastructure. Infrastructure at the subordinate level has to be increased. Again, the infrastructure is not provided by some of the governments in multiple states as well, and added to all of this, there is repeated adjournments taken by the advocates when it comes to their cases. So whenever there is these issues that are happening, there is pendency of the cases, and we know for the fact that justice delayed is justice denied. When all of this comes into picture, who is blamed? It is the Supreme Court of India which is blamed. Who is blamed? It is the judiciary which is blamed. But unfortunately, the responsibility is not taken by the executive and the government, and everything falls on the judiciary, says the Chief Justice of India. This is where he gives an example that we have the lawmakers, the legislature who makes the laws. One such example to explain in simple terms is the Farm Bill. What happened? Ideally, these farm bills should have been introduced by the government, taking the stakeholder approach, taking their viewpoint, taking the pre-consultative process into picture. This would have reduced the number of petitions being filed in the Supreme Court of India and also in the High Courts as well. But what happens? Since there is no pre-consultative process by the government comes up with a law. This law will have issues. The stakeholders are not happy with this particular legislation, and ultimately there are lakhs and lakhs of cases, and the government happens to be the primary litigator in all these cases as well. So whenever there is a legislation that is to be drafted. This legislation will require a pre-consultative process, a stakeholder approach. If the government is not taking into picture, it does not conduct a study, it does not know what would be the impact of this particular law, an assessment is not made, there will be repeated number of cases which will be filed, and that is going to lead to delay in the process of pendency, says the Chief Justice of India. Added to this, we also have the public prosecutors, we also have the advocates as well, we also have the investigating agencies as well. The investigating agencies will also have to ensure that all the investigations are done on a faster basis so that they are able to provide the evidences to the court of law. But even in this particular case, because the executive is not working, ultimately it is the judiciary which has to face the burden of pending, and it is the judiciary which is taking the responsibility of this pendency, and that is a wrong move, says the Chief Justice of India. This is where, as part of the reform, one may introduce what is called as the National Court of Appeal. What is this National Court of Appeal? We have pendency of the cases. This pendency of the cases will have to be reduced. So what do? We established another court called as the National Court of Appeal. When we look into the hierarchy in the Indian system, what we have is the Supreme Court, which is the apex body. Followed by this, what we have is the High Court. Followed by this, we have the District Court as well as the subordinate level courts. What is this National Court of Appeal? This will be an intermediary court which will be a buffer court between the High Courts as well as the Supreme Court. So the National Court of Appeal will act as a buffer between the Supreme Court as well as the High Court, and there will be regional establishments, which means one which can be established in the southern part where it can be Chennai or any other city in the southern part, then one for the western block, then one for the eastern block, and the other for the northern block. The National Court of Appeal with all these establishments will be primarily dealing with all those cases that are coming in the form of appeal. What do we mean by it? If the people are not happy with the decisions of the High Court, what do? They go to the Supreme Court. If they go to the Supreme Court of India, the Supreme Court of India already has a lot of cases. It further has to listen to these cases and ultimately deliver the judgment. But in this particular case, instead of going to the Supreme Court, these cases of appeal will go to the National Court of Appeal, which means the Supreme Court of India will not listen to any of these appeals. For example, with respect to matters related to civil cases, criminal cases, labor law cases, revenue matters, such will go to the National Court of Appeal, where there will be regional benches that will be established. Now the question is, should the National Court of Appeal be established or not? There are arguments which says no, this should not be established. There are arguments which say yes, the National Court of Appeal should be established. What are the arguments for no? That is, the National Court of Appeal should not be established. Back in the year 2014, we had the Attorney General Mukul Rohatgi. He rejected this very proposal of notion of a court of appeal. Why? That is because he says that when it comes to the system in India, the most of the cases that are in pendency are in the subordinate courts. 3.9 crore cases are in the subordinate courts. If any issues are present, concerns are posted about the Indian judicial system, reforms will have to be brought in the lower rank, which is the subordinate court, and not in the Supreme Court of India, by establishing the National Court of Appeal, says Mukul Rohatgi back in 2014. He also argued that setting up this court of appeal would only add another layer, which means more lawyers in picture, which means that there will be more lawyers who will be fulfilling their pockets at the cost of the people, says Mukul Rohatgi, who was then the Attorney General back in the year 2014. This is one side of argument. Then there are other side of argument as well. Recently, in the year 2020, we also had the now Attorney General, which happens to be Venugopal, who succeeded Rohatgi, who goes on to say that we have to establish National Court of Appeal to adjudicate all appeals when it comes from the High Court. So what does he say? He says that constitutional amendment will have to be brought into picture, and what we require is the establishment of this National Court of Appeal. What are the advantages? Whenever there is an establishment of the National Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court of India can primarily focus on all important issues. Let's say, for example, interpretation of the Constitution of India. Let's say, for example, cases related to fundamental rights. Let's say, for example, a primary question about the statutory provision, which is about the interpretation of law. In all these cases, the Supreme Court can look into it, which is why we have the apex court, that is the Supreme Court of India. However, now since we do not have the National Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court may have to listen to every type of case, is the first argument. If we have the establishment of the National Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court can primarily focus only on the constitutional matters. The others can be dealt by these regional National Court of Appeal courts, is one argument. The other argument is that when it comes to these courts, if they are not established, people as litigators will have to go to the Supreme Court of India. So if people are from southern part of India, let's say the state of Kerala, or from the state of Tamil Nadu, or from the state of Karnataka, they have to go to Delhi. If they have to go to Delhi to file this particular petition in the Supreme Court of India, they also will have to spend exorbitant prices as well. They also have to hire Supreme Court advocates as well. This means they are losing a lot of money. So if we are able to establish the National Court of Appeal, what we will have is the regional benches. This will comparatively reduce their pocket expenditure, is another side of argument. What is the Supreme Court's position on this particular proposal? Back in the year 1986, and after that, the Supreme Court of India wanted to establish as well. But after 1990s, the Supreme Court of India is not happy with it. Subsequent Chief Justices of India were not inclined to this idea of bifurcation of judicial powers, which means they felt that the power of the Supreme Court of India may go away, which is why they are not inclined to this particular proposal. However, we now have the Attorney General saying that there has to be a change in the hierarchy of courts, which is also being supported by the Chief Justice of India in the present situation. So we have to wait and watch whether such proposals may be accepted. What is the viewpoint of the government? The government feels that such constitutional amendment should not be brought in, as the constitution does not prescribe to such an idea. So it basically says that Supreme Court will be the apex court and it should have all the powers. So such introduction is not subscribed in the constitution. So the government says no to this particular proposal back in the year 2014. Now let's take some of the global examples where we have establishment of the National Court of Appeal in multiple other countries. Let's say, for example, in Ireland, we do have the National Court of Appeal, and this is acting as a buffer between the High Court as well as the Supreme Court. In South Africa, they also have created Supreme Court of Appeals, where this is second in hierarchy after the Constitutional Court. In England and Wales as well, the Court of Appeals is the highest court just below the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. So what is the way forward? One, the vacancy that is in the system, that has to be filled. Then the infrastructure have to be provided. Effort should be made to strengthen the subordinate judiciary so that proper justice can be dispensed with. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says EWS criteria rethink. What is this article all about? This is speaking about 10% reservation that was provided to economically weaker sections in the Constitution. When we speak about the Constitution of India, the Constitution of India before the amendment, that is the 103rd Constitutional Amendment, recognized only socially and educationally backward. It did not recognize economically backwardness. But what happens? The government realizes that there are certain section of the people who also have to be empowered. These people also require the affirmative action of the government. So it proposes and introduces what is called as the 103rd Constitutional Amendment. What is this 103rd Constitutional Amendment? Prior to this, you had reservation that was provided to the SC/ST community. You had reservation provided to the OBC community, which is nothing but the other backward classes. But after the 103rd Constitutional Amendment, what you had was a proposal made by the government where about 10% would be provided to the economically weaker sections. In order to provide reservation to these people, changes were made in Article 15 of the Indian Constitution, where Clause 6 was introduced. Changes were introduced in Article 16 of the Indian Constitution, where Clause 6 was introduced. Article 15 basically dealt with reservation in the educational institutions. Article 16 dealt with reservation in the employment and opportunities. So basically, the government wanted to ensure that apart from the SC/ST community, apart from the OBCs, there is another community who economically are backward. So what it introduced was economics as one of the criteria. So those people who do not have enough amount of money, they are comparatively backward when it comes to their economy. In such a situation, they would be provided reservation in education and also in employment opportunities, whether the educational institution is public or private, whether it is aided or unaided. A maximum of 10% would be provided to such economically weaker sections and also in the employment opportunities as well. This is where there is a question. The question is, what is the criteria? What was the criteria designed by the central government? The central government said that all those who are getting an annual income which is more than 8 lakhs are excluded. Let's say there is an individual whose family income is more than 8 lakhs. In such a case, such families will be eliminated, or they would not be provided reservation under this particular EWS quota. Then other criteria were also given as well. 5 or more acres of agricultural land, a residential flat of 1000 square feet and above, a residential plot of 100 square yards and above in notified municipalities, and a residential plot of 200 square yards and above in other areas. If they have any of these, once again, they would not be getting the reservation under the EWS quota. So basically, the government comes up with a criteria where it clearly says that any family which is getting more than 8 lakh, such will not get the reservation, and if they are meeting any of these criteria, they would not be getting reservation in the EWS quota. This is what the government says. This is where the Supreme Court steps into picture. The Supreme Court asks the government, how did you come up with this particular criteria? You have the OBCs. The OBCs in itself can be divided into two parts. One is what is called as the creamy layer. The other is what is called as the non-creamy layer. Who are the creamy layer people? These are the ones who are OBCs. That is, they belong to other backward classes, but they are economically advanced. Who are these economically advanced? According to it, if there are OBCs who are getting a package of 8 lakh annually and more, they would not be getting the reservation as part of the OBCs. So what does the government say? The government says we will be taking up similar criteria for the economically weaker sections. This is where the Supreme Court of India questions the government. What does the Supreme Court say? The OBCs are socially and educationally backward. Yes, you have fixed a criteria, but why is it the same even for the economically weaker sections? They are not socially backward, they are not educationally backward. So you come up with a criteria. If you are coming up with a criteria, what is the basis of this criteria? Will it be same for the city level? Will it be same for the urban rural level? So what is the criteria? Please come up with such a criteria so that you cannot equate the OBCs to that of the other economically weaker sections, because the economically weaker sections are not socially and educationally backward. But if you are coming up with the same criteria, that will not serve justice, says the Supreme Court of India. So the Supreme Court of India also says that you require data. Data of what? how these particular people are to be included in the economically weaker sections. Have you collected any information? Have you conducted any of the surveys? Do you have any statistical evidence for it? Have you asked your committee to ensure that there is a study for the same? If you do not have the relevant data, ensure that you conduct a study and then come up with this particular proposal. Or you also have to consider the per capita income or GDP of a particular state, or you also have to give exceptions when it comes to metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas. All this will have to be taken into picture, and only then reservation will have to be provided to the economically weaker sections, says the Supreme Court of India. So what is the government doing? The government is relooking into this particular proposal. It has said that it will consider these recommendations of the Supreme Court of India and ultimately set a criteria for the eligibility of those falling under the EWS quota. However, we also have to remember the Supreme Court in the past has said that 50% quota limit should not be breached, and the government in the present situation has breached the 50% quota. So what could be the future is what we have to wait and watch. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says pandemic forcing nations to develop newer frameworks for cyber security. The article here is speaking about cyber threats. It is speaking about issues surfacing on the cyber platform and what countries will have to do going forward. When we look at statistics, globally, nations have lost 6 trillion to cyber crimes in 2020, and such losses are estimated to exceed 8 trillion in the year 2021. In order to overcome this particular issue, what we require is a cyber security architecture. So going forward, what countries will do is they would come up with cyber security architecture so that they can protect their countrymen as well as the critical infrastructure of the country, is what is this article all about. Added to this, the article also focuses on cryptocurrency. One of the important factors that we have to know is what is called as the crypto jacketing. So as we speak about cryptocurrencies, the issues with respect to cryptocurrencies, we have a threat that is emanating in the form of crypto jacking. What is this crypto jacking? Basically, this is use of someone else's computer for mining the cryptocurrencies. What would happen? You would not know that there is a hacker. There is a hacker who's installed a program in your system and he is mining the cryptocurrency from your system. So he would be taking all the advantages of mining, but since your computer is being used, it will take all the electricity. It will also ensure that this particular victim's computer is used, and ultimately you may have to bear the losses of one because there is a virus in your system, and you may have to pay the electricity bill as well. You would not know that the hacker has installed a program into the system, and these electricity prices will usually be so much that the person who has to pay will also be in shock as well. So the tokens and fees are deposited into the wallets of the hackers and the attacker, but the cost of mining, that is the electricity, the wear and tear to the computers, will ultimately have to be borne by this particular user. This is where we require international cooperation. Why? Because internet is not just restricted to one country, it flows from one country to another, and it also has an integrated approach. So some of the important conventions include the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. The other is the Commonwealth Cyber Declaration. What is this Budapest Convention on Cybercrime? Basically, this happens to be the first international treaty where they wanted to address internet and cyber related crimes. So if there is a particular country which is losing on the cyber security threats, in such a case, other countries will also coordinate so that the country does not have any disturbances with respect to the critical infrastructure. So investigating techniques, increasing cooperation, developing a comprehensive program so that that will also help in legislating in national legislation is what is the idea of Budapest Convention. So the Budapest Convention is one of the important conventions where there is international cooperation between state parties to this particular treaty. However, remember, India is not part of this Budapest Convention. That is because India says that India did not participate in the negotiation of the convention, and hence it does not sign this particular convention. And one of the articles in the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime allows for transport access to data, and this India feels infringes the national sovereignty, which is why India is not part of Budapest Convention. But this happens to be one of the important conventions when it comes to international cooperation. Then what we also have is Commonwealth Cyber Declaration. This happens to be one of the world's largest and most geographically diverse intergovernmental commitment, where they will discuss about security threats, where they do discuss about promoting stability in cyberspace through international cooperation, and they will also have cyber security response teams coordinating amongst each other. So this will commit all the countries part of this declaration to ensure cooperation to counter any of the security related threats emanating on the cyberspace. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, what will a legal guarantee of MSP involve? The article here is speaking about some of the appeals made by the farming community. The farming community was not happy with the farm bills, so it goes on protesting against the farm bills. It goes on long agitation. It wants the government to withdraw this particular legislation, and as requested by the farming community, the central government goes ahead with repealing this particular bill. There is a proposal made by the central government. However, the farmers are not happy with it. What they want is more, which is in a form of statutory backing for the MSP. What is MSP? It is the minimum support price. Currently, it is being given to as much as 23 crops every year. What is that the farming community is looking for? The farming community wants a statutory backing to the minimum support prices. The minimum support price does not have a statutory backing. It is not present as a form of a law. It is an administrative mechanism taken by the central government. Since it is not present in the form of a law, these farmers want the government to introduce a law, come up with a legislation, guarantee the farmers that MSP is in the form of law and not in the form of administrative action. What are the advantages if such a backing comes up? What are the disadvantages? Why is the government against it? Has been explained in our economy this week video, which we had day before yesterday. So kindly look into it. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, have India and US resolved tariff and visa issues? The article here is speaking about United States of America and India Trade Policy Forum. It is speaking about Indian equalization levy on digital services. All these issues have been explained in our economy this week video, so kindly look into it. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. As part of mains practice question, you have to write an essay within the word limit of 1000 to 1200 words. The topic are: men have become the tools of their tools, corruption is like a ball of snow, once it's set a rolling it must increase. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, do give positive feedback to your friends answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.